So this past week, I had the opportunity to attend a retreat for senior pastors of UCC churches on the West Coast, recognizing that our churches experience things a little differently than churches in the Midwest or East or South might. And since I was out for a few days the week prior for my grandmother's funeral, I seriously debated whether I should go or not. But the retreat was right down the road in Menlo Park. And since I still don't know a lot of colleagues out here, I knew that it would be a good time for me to make some of those connections. And after an emotionally heavy week before, I also knew that I would benefit from a couple of days away at a retreat. And on Wednesday, while we were down there, we spent the afternoon doing two of my favorite things: exploring church buildings and modern art. I'm embarrassed to admit that this was my first time on Stanford's campus since moving here. Chris has given me a look in the back, like, how is that possible? It's true, I know. I can't believe I haven't been just down the road. One of the participants on the tour on the retreat was David Howell, the senior minister at the First Congregational Church in Palo Alto, and he did a lot of coordination of the week since he lives there. And he gave us an incredible art tour, something that he usually does for his confirmation classes. And so, we walked into the memorial chapel there on campus, and he explained how all of the stained glass was intentionally designed to depict stories of women in the New Testament, focus on women and children. And then mosaic art that's in between those stained glass features mosaic displays of women in the Hebrew Bible. And it was stunning. And so we saw this history and just this old, beautiful church. And then we walked across campus and we went to the art museums. And it was a tour of religious arts and iconography. And I was blown away. I could not believe the treasures that are just 20 minutes from here. And I think, if people are interested, that I might ask David if he'd be willing to do a tour for us. Is anyone interested in doing that? Oh, okay. I see heads shaking. I see hands going up. All right. I will get going on that. So in the Anderson collection, which is a building of art that belonged to the Anderson family, I discovered what I'm calling for today our modern lesson. And that is a painting by Adolf Gottlieb, and it's the Transfiguration 3. And so if you haven't noticed it in your worship bulletin, turn it. It's in the bulletin. Someone asked me what is that piece of art doing in the middle of the bulletin? And I said, it's there on purpose. We're going to talk about it today. How many of you have seen this piece of art in person? Anyone? A couple hands. Alice? Anyone in the choir? A few in the choir? Sandy and Robert? It's incredible. The Anderson collection is absolutely incredible. And our group probably spent about 10 minutes just staring at this piece, reflecting on it, asking questions. David does this tour for his confirmation class, and so he was asking questions that he asks his students. I mean, go figure. You've got a group of pastors, most of whom are preaching on the Transfiguration on Sunday, and here's a piece of art literally inspired by this text. Of course, we're going to stand there for a while and see what material we can get from our sermons for one another. But I love this. I love the colors. I love the orange, burnt orange, reddish kind of light that's up here at the top, and the chaos that's at the middle, and everything that's in between. This piece is very different from most of the interpretations about the Transfiguration. Different colors, it's abstract. There's not really figures in it. And this is what is called, I did a little research, a burst painting. It's a typology that Gottlieb developed in the late 50s, and it places two contrasting shapes on a vertical axis. I don't know why I'm holding this up in the air. You all have it in front of you. I'm going to put this down now. But as you look at this piece of art, would you have thought that it connected with the story we heard today? No, right? Can you see how it might, though? What do you see? How might you see the transfiguration in this? You can shout it out if you'd like. I'm not going to walk around with a microphone. Anyone have a thought or a takeaway as they look at this? The top right? The top is bright. The top is bright. The shadows, yeah. The shadows in here. They coexist. The chaos and the light, they coexist. Does this feel peaceful for you or chaotic? Who feels peaceful when they look at this painting?
There's a remnant of black that we can do something about.
Okay.
Over to the right.
Oh, yeah. There's that. Does anybody feel chaotic when they look at this painting? Is anyone just like, I have no idea what I'm looking at right now, but I'm going along with the flow? All right, that's good. That's good. Can you see, I think we've kind of mentioned it, like the in-between of this image? Maybe it feels like a moment of transition, or maybe it feels like these two things are already set. It can be transformed, yeah. Is your eye drawn to the top? Raise your hand if your eye is drawn to the top of the painting. Okay? Raise your hand if your eye is drawn to the bottom of the painting. Okay, a few both. Isn't it interesting how we all are attracted to and notice different things? And I want you to think about one more question here. In your head, you don't have to share this out loud, but think about if this painting represents a spiritual moment or experience in your life, or maybe just where you're at right now, because every moment is a spiritual experience. Where do you see yourself in it? Where do you see yourself in this? Are you in the light? In the shadows? Are you caught in the tension? This word transfiguration is a very churchy word, isn't it? And it really just means transform, to change form. The Greek Orthodox tradition, which actually started celebrating this as a high religious holiday, actually calls it the metamorphosis. Like a caterpillar that becomes a butterfly, something is fundamentally transformed. And while I love that imagery, especially for the resurrection, When I think about the transfiguration, I struggle with that a little because Jesus doesn't become something that he wasn't before. His divine nature was always present. That light doesn't come from the outside. That light has always been within. But what happens is what was always true becomes momentarily more visible. And the disciples, it's almost like they see it for the first time. And notice the context in which this is happening. Jesus goes up to the mountain. He brings along his closest disciples. And it was as they were praying, and I think the disciples actually fell asleep, but it was as they were praying that this transfiguration takes place. Sometimes we need to step away from all of the noise or the chaos or everything that is going on to encounter the sacredness of the divine that is actually always closer to us than our own breath. Looking at this painting again, I'm drawn between this space, between the two forms, and actually all around it. It's almost that liminal space, that thin space where transformation happens. And the transfiguration happens at this pivotal in-between moment of Jesus' ministry, of his journey. He has just shared what is probably his most difficult teaching yet. He tells the disciples that he will die, he will suffer, and rise again. And that if anyone is wanting to follow him, they need to deny themselves and take up their cross daily. We hear that story a lot as we begin Lenten journeys, don't we? But that's heavy stuff. Can you imagine hearing that from your beloved friend and your teacher, and you're trying to process all of that, and then he takes you up on this mountain to pray, and then as you're praying, this incredible moment happens, and you wake up, and you're blinded by this divine light on top of this mountain. And it's almost like God is saying to Peter and John and James, I know that this is a lot to take in, but look, here's a glimpse of something bigger. This is my son. Listen to him. You're going to need this moment to hold on to when things get difficult. And just as Jesus stands, or I guess floats maybe, I don't know. This is a great mystery. But as Jesus is there in that moment, in between, we find ourselves in an in-between moment as well. Today, as I mentioned earlier, is the last Sunday of Epiphany, this season where we have been celebrating the divine gifts of God's love made known in Jesus the Christ, not just in the birth story, but in stories throughout his ministry, throughout the Gospels, throughout the letters. And then on Wednesday of this week, Lent begins. And we go from this mountaintop, and we start to descend into the valley, and we begin our journey towards the cross. And I hope you'll join us on Wednesday at 7 o'clock as we begin that season together with our Ash Wednesday service. If we imagine Luke's gospel as a landscape, we are standing on the clearing of that mountaintop. And it's a moment for us to catch our breath and to stand in awe of the divine on all the ways that God reveals God's self. You know, this Epiphany, as we look back over these last several weeks, it was a long season of Epiphany. Lent and Easter are very late this year. But this year we journeyed through 1 Corinthians, and we focused on community. We focused on how Christ reveals himself in community and in our call to do the work for the common good as a community. And even here, as Jesus is transfigured, when God says, listen to him, he is in community. He is in community with his disciples, and he is in community with the prophets and the saints that have gone before him. This mountaintop isn't in isolation. Moses and Elijah and the disciples, Peter, John, and James, are also there. Moses and Elijah, who represent the law and the prophets, the foundations of faith. Jesus is standing right there between them, not replacing them, not superseding them, but he stands there in a divine kinship, both carrying and culminating their work. And I love Peter's reaction to this story. Our good friend Peter. Remember Peter from last year? I mean, he's all year round, but that's what we really focused on during Lent last year. Overwhelmed, shocked, not knowing what to say, he blurts out this suggestion about building these 3 shelters, one for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And it is such a human response. He isn't sure what to do. He knows that this is a big moment, and he knows that they must do something to mark it. And so he goes with what he knows. And he suggests putting up these tents, as they do throughout their faith experiences. He wants to capture it, to preserve it, to stay right there at the mountaintop, at this glorious revelation. And I get it. Who wouldn't want to hold on to that experience, right? Right? I remember growing up as a kid, one of my own mountaintop experiences was always going to church camp in the summertime. And I'm like, does it have to end? I just want to stay there. And then I would get back home, and all I would talk about for the next 2 days is church camp. And my friends and my family, I think, wanted to put duct tape over my mouth. But these mountaintop experiences are not meant to be permanent dwelling places. When Jesus and the disciples come down from that mountain, they immediately encounter a crowd with a boy who needs healing. And so Jesus moves from divine revelation directly to human need. From the extraordinary to the ordinary. From glory and into service. Words about God, art about God, encounters with the divine should lead us towards one another, especially towards the healing and the liberation of those who are oppressed. That is the point of this mountaintop encounter. That is the point of God being revealed once again in Jesus. Not to stay there, but to return to the people where the hard work of healing and transformation takes place. Let's go back to that divine voice in the cloud for a moment. God says, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Listen to him. Isn't it interesting that the command isn't worship him or behold him, but it's listen to him? What does it mean to listen to Jesus today? How do we resist the temptation to stay in comfort when Jesus calls us to act? When I listen, when I go back to that Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, I hear these words from Jesus saying, "Blessed are the poor." I hear, "Love your enemies. Care for the least of these. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first." You cannot serve both God and wealth. Don't judge, lest ye be judged. And I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. This past week, we saw what happens when leaders refuse to listen. When President Zelensky visited the White House, some chose division over shared humanity. And that's not the kind of community that we are called to be. That's not how we live out our Christian values. And whether it's in the halls or the offices of government buildings, or at the border of our nations, or in our own living rooms, division and hatred win when we stop listening to one another. When we stop listening on who Jesus calls us to be. The Transfiguration isn't just about seeing Jesus in all of his glory. It's about hearing him and following him and being changed by him. Because when we listen to Jesus, we are always led to transformation and healing, our own and the world's. This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him. So as we look towards Lent, and as we step into it, where is God calling you to listen? Where is transformation needed in your own life and in our community? And how can you hold on to this moment of clarity, of seeing Jesus in all of his glory, of being reminded to listen when the road ahead gets bumpy and murky? We don't just journey into Lent. We journey into transformation. And we do that together. Look around. We are each other's reminders on this road. Through uncertainty, through division, through struggle, but also through hope. because God is with us, as close to us as our own breath, in the mountain highs and the valley lows, and everything in between. And that, my friends, is good news. May it be so. Amen.